10 years ago, a friend of mine passed me a book. I read the book and I thought that it was a very, very interesting book because it was written by a Malaysian and it talks about Islamic countries, not only about Malaysia and Indonesia, but about Islamic countries around the world. The book makes a very strong argument that Islamic countries are doomed to fail. And I'm very pleased that today we have the author of the book, Syed Akbar Ali, with us to discuss the book. Well, thank you very much for meeting me this afternoon. So I really like the book. I remember the book was given to me as a gift about 10 years ago. And I read it, I was actually pleasantly surprised that the book was actually written by a Malaysian. So in terms of our audience, maybe you can give us a brief summary of what the argument is about.
Okay, thank you, James. I wrote the book in 2006, which is almost over 9 years now. The reason why I wrote the book and a short gist of what is in the book, I was concerned, I still am very concerned about the fate, the direction of the Islamic countries around the world, actually Islamic society as a whole, because Muslims tend to use one word to describe all Muslims around the world, which is the Ummah, which means the community of Muslims, of believers. So Islamic, although there are many Islamic countries, there's basically just one Islamic society. And in my view, this society was underachieving, underperforming, not achieving progress, sufficient progress, social progress, political progress, economic progress, as well as the other countries, other societies in the world, which they group under the non-Islamic societies, the non-Islamic peoples. So I was seeing that, you know, as we kept going forward in time into the 21st century, which is like supposed to be like a magical situation for the human race in terms of scientific, technological advancement, and which is true, it is happening. The human race as a whole has advanced tremendously scientifically, made huge progress, but the Muslim societies were falling behind. As I said, in economics, politics, and social achievement, and under physical threat of violence, of factionalism, wars, you know, which seem to be unceasing. So I thought, I was looking at them, and I came to realize that this seems to be a common factor, denominator among Islamic countries. So then I went into looking at the society itself and their faith and the religion, and I started seeing that the common denominator is that the religious belief. The religious belief seems to be holding them back. So I've done a lot of reading and research into Islamic religion itself, and I've come to understand that what they are claiming to uphold is not helping them. Okay. But then again, if you look at the Islamic history, there was a substantial period when the Muslims achieved major advances. They were world leaders in many things. There's a lot of recorded literature on the achievements of the Islamic civilization. So what made the present set of Muslims deviate so far from what their forebears have achieved? So my reading, my research, my thinking about it led me to come to understanding that this religion has been, it's not what it was before. It has been changed in many ways. It has been corrupted, and people are unfortunately upholding a very different version or a different understanding of what Islam was or is supposed to be, and that is what is causing them all these these trials and tribulations. So I wrote this book. This book captures these thoughts, what I just said, and more. Plus, also I've given a possible solution to the Muslims to get out of this predicament. So I hope we can discuss this today.
So anyway, I think some of the arguments you make in your book is quite interesting. You identify 7 areas where you think the Muslims are falling back. The first one is restricting on the flow of information. The second one is the subjugation of women. The third one is the inability to accept responsibility for individual or collective failure. The fifth one is domination by the restrictive religion, and here I suppose you're referring to Islam. And the sixth is a low valuation of education. In other words, in Muslim societies, they really don't value education, especially at higher end. And of course, the last one is the low prestige attached to any work. Could you elaborate on each of these points?
This list of 7, of course, other researchers, other writers have they have other lists. There's also a list of 12, which basically describes what is called a failed state. A failed state or a failing state is where things like this you find them in abundance, which keeps so the whole society back. Free flow of information seems to be the common predicament in most of these Islamic countries, where the state, the central authority, restricts access or restricts open discussion. But also, this restricting open discussion, intellectual discourse, questioning is actually under the domain of the religious people. Because religious people, the religious leadership, the clergy, the priestly class, they don't like people to ask them too many questions, because religion, as is frequently repeated by the religious leaders themselves, does not need logic or intellect. That's what they say. Even in Malaysia, we have the Mufti saying that you can't use too much intellect and logic when you discuss religion. So a necessary consequence of that is you cannot allow too much free discussion. So you have groups, for example, extremist groups like Boko Haram. It means Boko Haram means books are haram, books are forbidden, referring to Western education, Western reading, Western books. It is haram. They only want people to read religious books. So they're not against reading, but they want to control what you read. So they're restricting inquiry and discussion and debate. So that keeps the whole society down, and this seems to be a common factor among all the Islamic countries where religious authority shows its head. Then you have subjugation of women. This has been the blood, the part and parcel of religious theology teaching since for a long time, where women are always the victims of all religious rulings, decrees. Women are always number 2 or number 3. Inability to accept responsibility for individual or collective failure. This again, I see too frequently. Whenever something goes wrong, you look for scapegoats, you look for conspirators who are working against you, you look at Western conspiracies, all sorts of conspiracies out to get the Muslims, But actually, it's a failure to own up to your own responsibilities, to your own obligations. It's just, laying the blame on other people. This is another common feature you see in Islamic countries. And the clan identity, unfortunately, is more prevalent in the Middle East, the tribal identity, the clan identity. But, Islam is not homogeneous. You've got the big sectarian divides. You've got the Shias and Sunnis. And then among the Sunnis, you've got so many different sects among themselves. So they have this it's like a tribal identity. You identify actually according to your sect. So when you have differences of opinion, for example, about what Islam should be or what religion should be, basically what you're looking at is people putting forth sectarian views. So, and very often, like for example, in most countries, people who belong to a sect are also in a particular racial grouping. It happens in a lot of Islamic countries. In Malaysia, for example, the dominant sect is a Shafi'i sect, which is a subsect of the Ahlul Sunnah, the Sunnis. And I think 99.9% of the Shafi'is in Malaysia are Malays, see? So you have a racial identity, a language identity, which has its own history, and then you have this sectarian identity. So all this get jumbled up, and people at the end, they lose track of which is what they are actually. Yeah. So this is another problem. And then domination by the strict religion, I guess I am talking about that now. And low valuation of education and assignment to work. You see this in most Islamic countries, in my view, which I've mentioned in my book. There is very lower absorption of new technology, of science. The reason why I think they cannot absorb so much of science in their society, because they don't allow free inquiry. For example, in most Islamic countries, especially in Malaysia, we do not teach evolution in school. It's not discussed. In biology, they don't discuss about evolution, because it goes against religious view that God created the whole world, so you don't need to discuss evolution. I think you can still study and discuss evolution. You don't have to believe in it, but at least argue the scientific basis behind it, or why they say something. Because it will help you to grow your mind, especially young people. It will help the young people to understand science and how to debate something or discuss something in a logical manner. So even that is you don't have access to that kind of thinking in Islamic countries at the high school level or the junior high school level. So from a very early age, you're cutting off thinking in the society. So all this adds up to make Islamic societies fail or not achieve what they can achieve.
Well, the basis of book is that all these countries are what you call countries of doom. And looking back on the original thesis 10 years ago, we've seen a lot of failed states casting appear in Islamic countries, especially the Middle East. Would you agree that this sort of thing is actually also can affect countries outside the Middle East, Muslim majority countries?
Well, yes, definitely, it adds up. I mean, once you find that these Islamic countries are failing, they're not able to provide their younger people what everybody desires, like a good life, a high standard of living, good education, prospects for their own children. So after the Second World War, you find that a lot of Islamic countries started becoming independent. They have now been on their own steam the last 50, 60 years. And the younger generation who were born after the Second World War, people of my age, those who were born post 1950s, 1960s, they were looking forward. They go like, okay, now we're independent countries, our great future is in front of us, we are Muslims, we're going to succeed, things like that. 30, 40, 50 years down the road, you find that your state, your government, your leadership, people whom you hope for, whom you trusted, did not deliver that to you. So you find that a lot of people become radicalized, they lose faith in the system, the leadership. Also, there's been, unfortunately, you have these failures in the system like corruption, wrong or horribly mistaken economic policies, adventurism in how to develop countries, which cause more harm than good. So you find that there's a lot of radicalization. People get fed up, they get tired, and they say that maybe we have not been Islamic enough. So they become attracted to very radical, extremist, fringe kind of thinking, and these people become the extremists. And in many countries, they have also become the violent groups, and they have resorted to violence. Fighting, war, suicide bombing, using violence as a method to achieve what they think is the right way of what the religion should be, and organized violence. So you have all these terrorist groups, and yes, it has affected all the countries around the world. You have terrorist acts by extremists, religious extremists all over the world, from Bali to Philippines to US to London to Madrid, everywhere. It affects all of us. Traveling now is so much more complicated and difficult and adds cost to us because of a few guys who blew up aeroplanes and things like that all over the world.
One of the important points you made in the book, and you devoted whole chapter 11, is that many Islamic countries or so-called Islamic countries around the world actually do not practice the real religion. Can you elaborate on that point?
I've from my reading from a long time ago, when I first started researching Islam and especially the Quran, as long as I grew up, I read the Quran in Arabic, in a very sing-song fashion, not understanding a word that I was reading. It was only much later, after I was in college, that I read the Quranic translation. And then to my surprise, I found out that all those things, or many of those things which my parents taught me, my religious teachers taught me about Islam all those years, I couldn't find in the Quran. See, it's not there. So I used to talk to people, discuss with people, the so-called learned people, things like that. I did my own reading, my own research, and I found out that what we see every day acting in front of us as Islam, portraying Islam, is not found in the Quran at all.
So the examples you give is, for example, a girl wearing hijab.
Yes, you see, because the word hijab is mentioned about 14 times in the Quran, but not once does it refer to hijab as the head cover for the women. Hijab literally means a barrier, and it is used in the Quran in that fashion. It is a barrier in so many ways. Even words like hudud, the very famous hudud laws which we hear about almost every day in Malaysia, being debated every day. Hudud in the Quran does not mean these hudud laws. It means, hudud means limit, like a speed limit is called a hudud. So in the Quran, also there are about a dozen times, slightly more, where the word hudud is mentioned. It refers to domestic issues, husband and wife issues, divorce issues, division of property. That's where it says you shall not exceed the hudud, the limit set by God, by Allah. So that's a usage of hudud. So I find that all these things which they say about Islam, about this hijab, punishment under hudud, stoning people to death, it is not found in the Quran. So then I asked, where does it come from? It is extra Quranic, alright? There is, of course, they say that this is taught by the Prophet, in what is called the Hadith and the Sunnah, things like that. Okay, so be it. But what I'm trying to say is that these are not in the Quran. So a lot of things which you see the Muslims doing around the world today, which appears unpleasant to us, they hoist the Quran, they hold the Quran in their hand and they say they are following God's law. But in truth, if you open that book and read it, you'll not find those things which they are saying. It's not in this book.
And you made the claim that in fact, when you study the issue further, you found that many of these things actually came from the Old Testament.
There is a very, very, very close similarity. It can be quite scary sometimes, because the amount of similarity in the detail between what is upheld by the Muslims, the extra Quranic beliefs, that means beliefs outside the Quran, and what is found in the Old Testament is very uncanny, very, very, very similar. Stoning to death for adulterers is in the Old Testament. It is not in the Quran. Well, then the religious people say it's also in the traditions of the Prophet. Okay, that's what they say. But the point is, it is not in the Quran. You have the male, you see the religious guy, they always wear a dress, they have a turban on the head and wear robes. Again, all these are not in the Quran. The Quran does not talk anything about how men should dress. But it is described in detail in the Old Testament, how the religious people, the Levites, Levite is a religious person, a Jewish Levite, how they should dress. And it's mentioned they should wear a robe, they should wear a turban, they should wear a sash, they should carry a staff, things like that. So there's a lot of similarity between what is practiced as religion, the Islamic religion, and what is written in the Old Testament. I'm not blaming the Old Testament, I'm just pointing out the fact. It is there. You talk about the story of creation of a woman from the man's rib. Now this story is not in the Quran. It is in the Old Testament, and it is in the extra Quranic material theologies which the religious people have. But I am fascinated by the degree of detail, because in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, it says that God put the man to sleep and then he removed the rib from him and fashioned a woman out of the rib. The religious scholars' version, it just doesn't mention that the man is asleep, but most of the other things are quite similar, where he fashioned a woman out of the rib of the man. So there's a lot of similarity. So all these things are not in the Quran, it is extra Quranic. And this is where you find that also the differences arise, because these sectarian differences, a lot of the time, there are different interpretations of what is not in the Quran. All this, like for example, you have the stoning to death. Between the different sects, there are differences in how to go about carrying out the stoning to death for adulterers and adulterer. Also, this cutting the hands. Where should you cut? Which part of the hand should be cut? What is the minimum theft value of the theft before somebody's hand can be cut? So these are the differences and the arguments that come up. These are sectarian differences. The other thing is, which I want to highlight, a lot of people say that, well, the differences among the religious sects and the Islamic sects is because different way of interpreting the Quran. Okay, fair, it's a fair statement. But how do you have differences interpreting something that is not in the Quran? Like stoning to death is not in the Quran. So the different sects have different ideas of how to handle stoning to death. They are arguing with something which is not in the Quran. The recent issue in Malaysia, there was an issue of dogs. These Muslims cannot have dogs, and there was a big somebody, I think a Malay Muslim girl, she was taking care of dogs and she got in some trouble with religious authorities. It is not in the Quran. So different sects have different ideas of how Muslims should go about handling dogs. Are they forbidden or are they allowed to, whatever. So these are sectarian differences, non-Quranic, extra Quranic. So a lot of this hair-splitting argument, this heartache that has come up among Muslims that makes their society so argumentative and difficult are these differences, these interpretations on things which are not in the Quran.
So, given your arguments that many of these states in the Middle East has failed because of the things that you have outlined, where does this put Muslim majority countries such as Indonesia and Malaysia in this part of the world?
They are, to me, there are a lot of things impacting the Muslims. They have their own problems, which we've been talking about now. Then I find that the rest of the world, technological advancement, scientific advancement is advanced. It's moving at such a rapid clip, very, very accelerated pace. There is a real danger that the Muslim countries will miss the boat again. The Muslim countries missed the Industrial Revolution way back when it happened after the European Renaissance. The Muslim countries missed out on that because they totally cut themselves off from modernization, from new thinking, and the result of that was that they became colonized for the last 700 years. Now there's another paradigm shift, a giant leap in technology. Technology has really taken off now. We cannot imagine how it's going to happen 50 years from now in terms of technological advancement of the human race. We might have populated the planet Mars, but I do not know. But the Muslims are still falling back. They still have not come to the level of participating in free discussion, free dialogue, open inquiry, not castigating or criticizing or punishing someone for coming up with new thinking. The Muslims are still at that basic building block level, whereas the rest of the world is racing ahead. So my fear is that the Muslims are going to be left behind. They're going to be impacted by all the advancements going on around them, in the sense that there's no way that they are not going to be enslaved again.
So how do Muslim countries like Malaysia and Indonesia outside the Middle East, so how do they escape this club of doom?
I've always, in the book, I've always said that one of the most important things that the Muslim countries must do is that they must really open up the space for discussion. You must really open up the space to question religious authorities for what they believe or what they say, without fear of any persecution or prosecution. In Malaysia, there's something called a 356. 356 refers to 3 years jail, 5,000 fine, or 6 strokes of the rotan, the punishment in our penal system. This is if you breach anything which the religious orthodoxy considers as against their understanding of religion. If you wrote a book which criticized the orthodoxy, which criticized the accepted notions, you can be fined, you can be jailed 3 years, fined 5,000, or given 6 strokes of the rotan. A classic example, the writer Qasim Ahmad. He wrote a book in 1986 which was banned. They just banned the book. Recently, he made a statement referring to that book, and he's been charged in court for saying something about a religious something, the hadith something, which the orthodoxy does not agree. So they say he is now, he's insulting Islam, or he's insulting religion, something like that. Whatever it is, bottom line is they're charging him in court, where he's subject to this 356, maximum jail of 3 years, 5,000 fine, 6 strokes of the rotan. He's 80 years old. I don't think he get the rotan. But he's being, they say prosecuted. I think this is persecution. So when you have this kind of legislation in Islamic countries, there is no way you're going to get any kind of new thinking from the society. They'll be afraid.
And is this sort of law preventing people from questioning the clergy class? Is this very common in all Islamic countries?
Not all Islamic countries may have written down so clearly as in Malaysia, but without a doubt, all Islamic countries, if the government doesn't go out and prosecute these people, the society itself will persecute them. So you find in Egypt, you find in other countries, village mobs have attacked writers, or people on the street have, gathered and expressed anger and violence at newspapers, or usually writers and thinkers who say things which they don't like, So the community sort of acts as its own policeman to prevent any kind of questioning, to prevent any kind of new thinking, because this is what has always been taught by the clergy. This is part and parcel of religious education, religious indoctrination in all Islamic countries. You ask a question that is out of line, which is outside the norms, which is against orthodoxy, you pay the price.
If this is the case, then Malaysia and Indonesia will be problematic in the coming years.
If it persists, I see that this will be a problem. If the rest of the world does not progress and remains stationary, it's not so bad. But the rest of the world is progressing at light speed. And if the rest of the Muslims in Malaysia and Indonesia do not wake up and understand this, then they are just going to regress more and more. And the only way they can find some inner peace, I'm talking about the authorities, is to exercise more of their power.
So no clear solutions.
No clear solution, but I find my suggestion is that we have to open up the space and the room for discussion, for questioning. And one way of doing that is we have to abolish these laws. We have to abolish restrictive laws which restrict Muslims You see, the non-Muslims are lucky, you don't have these kind of laws against you. See. The Muslims have to abolish these kind of laws which seek to prosecute them legally, for just questioning and saying things which is deemed as not right by the religious orthodoxy. So we have to abolish these laws, otherwise the Muslims cannot grow.
Well, thank you very much, Syed. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon to share your thoughts with us. When I read the book 10 years ago, I thought it was a very, very important book, and I've been trying to get you since then to come in and have a chat about it. But I thought a good time to do it was after 10 years to see whether your idea stand up to the test of time. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.